The emergency beacon drifted through the silence between stars, a fragile pulse of light and sound slipping between debris fields, and the gravity wells of dead moons, its signal broken and desperate, repeating itself in cycles shorter than a breath. Inside the message were fragments of language, fragments of pain. "Help us," it said, "injured, hostile, unknown children aboard," repeating over static again and again until the void swallowed it and then passed it on. The signal came from the edge of the Calor expanse, a stretch of unclaimed black space littered with wrecks from forgotten skirmishes, a place where only the desperate dared to travel, and the unlucky tried to survive. The Liana Grace was a cargo freighter, old and patched together with goodwill and second-hand tech. It carried 25 crew, 5 volunteers, and 36 cryo cradles, meant for refugee children being relocated after the collapse of the Tsarnan corridor. Earth received the signal within 6 minutes. The data was parsed, triple-checked, and confirmed by AI and human hands alike. The distress was real, the danger was unclear, the response was immediate. The UNSS Solace, already in nearby orbit around a medical outpost, shifted trajectory, its mission parameters rewriting themselves in real time under an ancient law known to every Terran born after the fall of Europa, where millions had died because help arrived too late. The Solace was not a warship. Its hull was unarmed, its crew trained not in combat, but in crisis medicine, disaster relief, and the sacred task of healing. Their armor was white and unmarked save for the blue insignia of the Healer's Pact, a symbol known across hundreds of systems and thousands of cultures, a symbol that meant safety, neutrality, compassion without exception. Captain Juno Everin reviewed the situation with practiced calm, his voice steady, even as the room filled with urgency. "We go now," he said. No hesitation, no council vote, no delay. Drones began pre-launch sequences, medics secured packs, volunteers strapped in with determined silence. Some wrote names of their loved ones on their sleeves, others whispered prayers or ancient earth hymns, not out of fear but habit. Within an hour, the Solace reached orbit around the Liana Grace. What they saw chilled even the most seasoned among them. The freighter drifted aimlessly, power down, hull breached in 3 places, escape pods launched but unreadable, half the cryo units offline, the rest flickering weakly like dying stars, and nearby, hovering silent like vultures, were 3 Corellic vessels, dark-shaped and watching, but making no contact. Still, the mission proceeded because it had to, because to humanity there was no situation too complex, no enemy too close. When innocent lives were at stake, medics dropped into the wreckage in 2s and 3s, bringing scanners, medpacks, plasma torches. Their movements were careful, respectful, rapid, working through fire and frozen decks, searching for signs of life and calling back with reports. 1 child breathing, 1 crewman trapped, 1 cryo cradle cracked open. The silence of the Corellic ships continued even as the first child was pulled from the rubble, even as a medic named Ayaka wept quietly while resuscitating a broken boy, even as Earth held its breath. And the galaxy looked away. The predators watched and waited, and behind the stars, something old inside humanity stirred. The descent was silent except for the steady hum of the med pods and the whisper of emergency comms moving through static. The team from the Solace touched down on the ruined freighter with practiced grace, their boots finding grip on cracked plating, their gloved hands already reaching for life-saving tools. The air inside the wreck was thin and laced with coolant, the heat barely registering through their suits as they moved with the urgency of those who know that every second is a breath someone might not take. Captain Everin remained aboard the Solace, his eyes locked on every data stream coming in from the team, his voice calm, guiding, tracking, speaking names he knew like his own heart. Ayaka, Ruiz, Dorian, Kalia, the best of them, chosen not for strength, but for empathy, for nerves that never cracked even under blood and fire. Their orders were clear: extract survivors, stabilize criticals, secure the children above all else. The Solace carried no weapons, only shields and soft-spoken machines that hummed comfort into the ears of the dying. Its escorts were civilian patrol ships retrofitted with search drones and extra medical bays. None of them were prepared for resistance, because none of them expected it, because no one in all of space would dare to fire on those who wore the white of the Pact. The Corellic vessels hovered in silence just beyond visual range, No transmission sent, no recognition offered, their hulls cold black and unmoving like the dead eyes of some great predator waiting in stillness. The humans noted the shapes, but did not slow. This was not a negotiation, this was rescue, and the code of the pact had no space for fear. Inside the Liana Grace, the humans worked with speed and precision. Ayaka pulled two children from beneath a fallen support beam, her exo-arms straining against the weight, while Ruiz administered oxygen and whispered in a language the children might remember. Kelia sliced through a sealed door to reach the bridge where 3 crew members were trapped and bleeding out, their voices ragged but alive. All across the wreck, the lights of the medics danced like fireflies against the dark, their scanners pinging faint life signs, and cries for help bursting through walls thick with silence. There was no panic, only purpose, no shouts, only the rhythm of breath and duty. Earth had sent its best, and they came with open hands and steady hearts. Then, without warning, the first shot came, a sharp line of heat that pierced the side of the freighter just above the medics, a warning shot meant to intimidate, or so the Corellics claimed later, but to the humans it was the sound of something sacred being shattered. Ruiz called it out over comms, his voice tight but focused. Unknown energy weapon origin, Corellic signature, possible hostile intention. Seconds later, a second shot landed, this time near a cryo cradle, shattering its edge and filling the room with the hiss of dying air. Ayaka screamed into the mic that they had a child exposed, that they needed cover, that this could not be a mistake. And Captain Everin stood on the bridge of the Solace, his face a sculpture of something ancient and furious and still. In the cold void above the freighter, the Corellic ships finally moved forward, their weapons not raised, but not hidden either, and down below a healer knelt, shielding a child with her own body as her suit alarm screamed. Mercy had arrived first, and it was met not with gratitude but with fire. The first death came fast and cruel. Ayaka Ruiz was kneeling over a boy, no older than 6, whose cryo cradle had cracked in the blast, her hands pressed to his chest, trying to restart a heart that had barely lived long enough to dream, her voice counting quietly 1, 2, 3 as her suit alarms blared in her ears. And then the bolt hit her square in the back, throwing her forward over the child. And for a moment she looked like she was only protecting him, like she was still alive, still trying. There was no time to mourn, not then, not yet, not as Dorian screamed her name, and reached too late, not as the second bolt hit the wall beside him and sent shards of heated metal into his leg. He crawled through pain to pull the boy to cover, dragging both child and fallen medic behind the shattered remains of a cargo pod, while above them the freighter shuddered with more impacts from Corellic fire. The Corellics made no demands, they issued no warnings, they simply fired, precise, measured, cruel, as if this were not an act of war, but of extermination. Their weapons found soft targets, unarmed medics, scanning for life signs, patching wounds, shielding children, and the drones, the healing drones meant to dispense aid and warmth and oxygen, were torn from the sky by pulse blasts that lit the corridors like lightning. Captain Everin ordered a full retreat within moments, but even that was chaos. The extraction pods had to navigate between crossfire and heat spikes, and some had to be rerouted around damaged shafts filled with falling debris. And worse, in one corridor, a medic named Jay got a pod open and placed 3 children inside, only to be pinned by a collapse as he tried to follow. And still he smiled at them. Still he said, "You are safe now," and closed the hatch. In total, 5 medics died that day, 2 more were wounded, and 16 children were pulled from the wreck by a team that refused to leave even as their own lives were marked for the taking. The Corellics did not pursue, they simply stopped firing as the last of the pods lifted from the wreck, and the Solace turned its shields to full rotation. A quiet message came across open frequencies: "This vessel is under Corellic salvage protection. Further interference will be treated as an act of aggression." No one aboard the Solace spoke as the transmission played. No one had words for the madness they had just witnessed. The silence on the bridge was not shock. It was rage held tight in the chest, like breath underwater, like the seconds before a storm. Everin stood over the main console, eyes scanning the names of the fallen, their bios flickering red with finality. And then he reached for the oldest part of the system, a secure line direct to Earth, one that had not been touched in nearly 2 centuries. He spoke 3 words into the mic: Sigma-9 confirmed, and nothing more. The transmission left the solace and traveled faster than light through relay after relay, bouncing from station to outpost to hidden archive, until it reached the heart of Earth, and from there it echoed outward, not as a scream, not as a cry for help, but as a promise. Humanity would not forget, and it would not forgive. The signal reached Earth in the middle of nightfall, across the old cities, across New Dakar and Pacifica Core, and the tundra towers of Nova Moscow, where skies glowed orange from orbital mirrors. It passed through the archives of Geneva, where the code Sigma-9 lit consoles that had not activated in lifetimes, and it spread like fire through channels forgotten by time and untouched by politics. It was not a call to war, it was something deeper, something older. The council convened without hesitation, members arriving in robes or armor or plainwork jumpsuits. No words wasted, no debates summoned, only a single file played on every screen: the footage from the Solace, unedited, uncut, raw images of white armored medics shielding children with their bodies of drones bursting in flame as they dispensed hope of blood-soaking sterile decks and silence falling like dust. There were no votes, because Earth does not vote when healers are murdered and mercy is met with slaughter. Orders went out in coded bursts, invisible to most and unmistakable to those who remembered what Terra was when it stood alone, when the skies over Mars turned red, not from atmosphere, but from orbital fire in the shipyards beneath Olympus Mons. Production lines halted and rerouted, vast frameworks detached from station spines, and began assembly of hulls marked with ancient sigils and new names of the fallen. From Europa, beneath its frozen seas, deep vessels, long thought ceremonial, turned and rose to the surface, their launch tubes warming for the first time in centuries, their crews young and discipline, born of peace, but taught the weight of legacy. They stepped into armor that did not gleam and carried no rank markings, only white circles across their chests for every life lost aboard the Solace. On the moon, Cradle Base reactivated the old war fleets mothballed since the Centauri Accord ships named after healers and peacemakers, and those who had died with open hands, the UNSS Ruiz and the J. Aegis and the Ayaka Rising, all fueled in silence, while families of the fallen watched from viewing galleries, not with tears but with steady eyes. Across the belt, message buoys changed color from blue to red, from signal to summon. Every colony, every station, every human voice received the word, not vengeance, not war, but response. And across the systems, allied species watched and did not speak, because they too knew what Earth did when the sacred was broken. The Coralic Confederacy did not respond to the first wave of messages, did not acknowledge the footage, did not offer explanation or apology. They believed it would pass, that the humans would protest, then retreat, that Earth would file grievance, then move on as it had in trade disputes and minor border violations and piracy claims. But this was not trade, and these were not pirates, and the blood spilled was not political. It was healer blood, and for that Earth would rise. Not for conquest, not for territory, not for pride, but because in the stars among all the species of the galaxy one truth remained unchanged. Humanity does not let mercy die unanswered. The Coralic defense grid identified the human fleet 32 hours before it reached their nearest colony, and still they did not believe it would come. They believed the humans would posture, perhaps send envoys, perhaps bark into the void and return to their laws and bureaucracies. They did not understand that Sigma-9 was not politics, it was blood law. The fleet did not transmit warnings, did not open hailing frequencies, did not negotiate. It arrived in formation so tight it cast shadows on the orbiting moons, each ship marked with the symbols of the dead, each hull etched with names not of admirals or strategists, but of medics and field volunteers and children whose lives had been lost beneath the fires of betrayal. Coralic defense platforms fired the moment they came within range. It made no difference. The first barrage passed through energy shields that adapted in microseconds. The second never reached the targets as pulse drones intercepted with lethal speed. The Coralics had never faced a fully unified human fleet. They had never fought those trained for deep void scenarios, where diplomacy had already failed and doctrine had been replaced by resolve. The orbital station above Corellic Prime fell in 7 minutes, not destroyed, simply disabled. Each system shut down in cascading silence. Boarding units swept through with tranquilizers and stun foam. Not a single civilian was harmed, not a single control room breached with lethal force, because the mission was not extermination, the mission was remembrance. On the ground, evacuation sirens cried out as human drop pods descended, not in random chaos, but in lines like the teeth of ancient machines. Every landing zone, calculated for minimum impact and maximum presence from the ash, walked armored medics, field engineers, and 100,000 drones carrying supplies and scaffolding, and medical stations wrapped in white, the color of Earth's mercy, the color of warning. The Corellic soldiers who resisted were subdued quickly and efficiently. Those who surrendered were treated with respect, fed and bandaged and guarded by soldiers who carried no anger in their eyes, only purpose. And across the skies, broadcasts began in every Corellic dialect. Images from the solace looped between stills of the fallen, not for shock, but for truth, because the humans believed in memory, and memory required honesty. High command of the Corellic Confederacy attempted to negotiate, then to plead, then to accuse, and were met only with silence, until the lead vessel, the UNSS Everin, transmitted a message only 6 words long: your war was with mercy, not us. No fleets moved against Earth, no allies rose for the Corellics, no declarations of defense came from other powers, for all the galaxy understood what this was. This was not conquest, it was consequence. It was the storm Earth had always kept leashed, now unshackled, not in wrath, but in duty. By the time the last city was secured, the human presence was vast, but orderly. Clinics stood where command centers had been. Children were fed where soldiers once drilled. Every wall bore the symbol of the pact, and below it a name, and below that a phrase etched in the language of the stars. We remember who came to heal. The campaign ended without fanfare, without parades, without declarations of victory, because there was no victory, only balance restored, only the message made clear in ways that no law or tribunal ever could. The human fleet did not linger longer than it needed, did not claim territory, did not demand tribute. They stayed long enough to rebuild what was lost and remind the galaxy of what had been taken. On Corellic Prime, clinics stood where fire had fallen, staffed not only by human medics, but by Corellic volunteers who had seen what Earth's mercy looked like when it bled, and when it rebuilt. In the cities where resistance had been strongest, Earth left behind water purification towers, food replicators, fusion batteries, and silence, not the silence of conquest, but of a lesson learned in bone and memory. The high command of the Corellic Confederacy was not executed, not imprisoned. Instead, they were taken to a converted hospital. Inside what had once been their war chamber, they were made to walk the halls and meet the wounded. They were made to hear the names of the medics who died trying to save their people, and then they were made to watch the testimony of every survivor, recorded without filter or anger, only truth. They were given back their power under condition not of control but of understanding, and in every chamber and every office they returned to the walls bore the symbol of the Healer's Pact etched in alloy that could not be removed without melting the structure itself. It would be the last thing they saw each night, and the first thing they saw each day. Across the galaxy the story spread not as propaganda, but as history. A dozen species rewrote their codes of engagement. 100 stations posted the human phrase, "We do not fire on those who heal," in every trade port, in every neutral zone, in every place where mercy might one day again walk in white. The Solace returned to Earth in silence, carrying the bodies of its fallen and the names of those it saved. It was met not by politicians, but by families, by children grown older, by volunteers from every branch of the pack, their hands pressed to their hearts as the ship passed overhead. And in every human system, a moment of stillness was held, not of mourning but of promise. Captain Everin retired 3 months later, not out of grief but completion. His last message, logged into the Pact archive, stated simply, "They will never doubt again." And then he walked into the mountains of Terra and was not seen again. The Solace was rebuilt not into a warship but into a museum that still flies, a mobile shrine to those who heal under fire, its new name etched along the side in a dozen languages, not one of them human. The name is Ayaka, and it moves between colonies as a reminder not of war, but of the cost of violating peace. Because humanity is kind until it is not peaceful, until it is not gentle, until it must be something else, something older, something forged in fire and bound by memory. And when mercy is attacked, humanity does not scream, it moves. And the stars themselves remember.